construction, intelligent design, marriage, family, child rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the sexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to spend some time in the first step in the news. Certainly would like to hear from some of you that live in Georgia and North Carolina, because that will be our first set of topics. What's been happening there in terms of these various bills dealing with sexual orientation. We'll get into a couple of other issues along the way, probably talk about some lessons we've learned from what has happened in Europe in terms of Muslim terrorism. We also have the Attorney General of the state of Texas, Ken Paxton, who will be with us a little bit later. We'll talk about the Supreme Court case that went to the court from Texas having to do with restrictions on abortion. He also has some things to say about what he and other attorney generals have done on the immigration issue. And so we have, of course, quite a bit to talk about. And somewhere along the line, we'll probably get back to an attempt to try to pass what is called a Religious Freedom Restoration Act bill. These have been around for some time. There is a national one. And when this has become controversial, I want to point out that we still have this at the federal level. So states are only simply establishing what already has been passed in the national government, and it would want to apply those to the things that happen in the states. But nevertheless, that has become controversial, and those of you in Georgia are well aware that a number of people threatened, for example, that they would pull businesses out of Georgia, which of course then for them. And I have a commentary that's coming out next week, but I thought I'd give you a little of a preview, because when you think of Disney especially, this one was the most disturbing of the both. And let's face it, that we all love Disney movies and Disney theme parks. And, I can't imagine that we would want to actually sully the reputation of Disney, but yet they have been throwing their weight around lately, and the Disney company threatened to pull back its film and television productions in Atlanta, and I think they are the major reason why they were able to force a veto by the governor. Now, I might add the NFL and a few others, but let me focus on Disney for just a minute, because I see a little bit of a contradiction here. Maybe you can help me if you don't see it, because I certainly see it. And that is, on the one hand, Disney says, we will pull our film and television productions out of Atlanta because you're trying to pass a bill that would protect pastors and Christian businesses from the gay bullies. But on the other hand, Disney Corporation has theme parks in China, and they're just about ready to open the newest theme park in Shanghai, China, a $5.5 billion theme park. Now, China. Now, this is the same country we talk about here on Point of View that has a brutal one-child policy, that has forced abortions. This is a country that has a terrible legacy of human rights abuses, brutal crackdowns and labor camps. And frankly, if you don't see the hypocrisy in that, I'm not sure I can come up with a whole lot more to explain that to you. And it reminded me of something I encountered when I was in graduate school for the second time. One of my professors at Georgetown University, Jean Kirkpatrick, she wrote an essay called Dictatorships and Double Standards. That essay actually made her famous and was one of the reasons that Ronald Reagan then tapped her to be UN ambassador. But she at the time wrote this because she was critical of the Carter administration that would demand that autocratic countries liberalize their policies while failing to rarely apply those policies to communist governments. And so the kind of the idea is that they would strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. They would look at the speck in somebody else's eye and miss the log in their own, if you want to use a biblical phrase. And I think Disney would do themselves good if they'd focus attention on the repression in China before threatening to punish Georgia for simply trying to protect people of faith. David French wrote about this recently, and I love the title of his column. Why does the Walt Disney Company prefer communist to Christians? Because after all, the Religious Freedom Restoration Bill would do something you would think actually Disney Corporation would support, but of course they've been too busy listening to some of the gay activists. It would have protected pastors from being forced to officiate at homosexual weddings. It would have protected religious organizations from having to rent their facilities for events that violated their belief. And so I think there is a good example of that. And of course, this is something that John Stonestreet, our good friend who's been on this program many times, has written about as well. His commentary today talks about the fact that, again, the governor at the same time much trouble in Arizona and Indiana. But as Ryan Anderson notes in the Daily Signal, this bill offered no protections for florists, photographers, bakers, or other wedding-related professionals to live by their religious convictions. This bill would have only protected the freedom of ministers from officiating same-sex ceremonies for faith-based organizations, from hiring employees whose views undermine their mission, and for protecting churches and their ministries from state-level discrimination. In other words, the bill would have protected what he calls the freedom of worship, but not even the freedom of religion. And he starts the column by talking about the fact that he remembers when he first heard Chuck Colson make a distinction between freedom of religion and freedom of worship, something we've talked about before here on this program, that you see that this bill wouldn't have even protected freedom of religion. It only really kind of protected the church. And yet that was enough for Disney, the NFL, Salesforce, and a variety of others to pressure put on the table today. But let's, while we're talking about the Eastern Seaboard, also talk about North Carolina, because as you may be aware, that has also become an issue, and that is the so-called bathroom bill that was part of what happened in North Carolina. Frank Turek, I think, did a very good job of providing some answers to that, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But these have been around for some time. You have legislatures and city councils that have wanted to have these so-called bathroom bills, and that is because gay activists have been able to convince many people that the next kind of barrier to discrimination is the barrier that would prevent transsexuals from using a public bathroom of their choice or preference rather than their biology. And, of course, on the other side, you've seen, of course, these legislative bodies that have wanted to pass bills that would protect women from predators. And so I want, when we come back from the break, spend a little bit of time talking about this particular issue as well. But again, you can see in this particular case that a number of other individuals weighed in on that as well. On Thursday, for example, the National Basketball Association announced that they may reconsider hosting the 2017 All-Star Weekend activities in Charlotte because of their commitment to, here you go, equality and mutual respect. But, of course, as, again, John Stonestreet points out, they apparently missed the irony in taking this moral stand, given that the NBA and the WNBA are separate leagues. But Ryan Anderson of the Heritage Foundation didn't, observing in Twitter, hey, NBA, you're against bathrooms based on biology. You think basketball should be as well? So we're going to come back and talk a little bit about a couple of these bills in Georgia and North Carolina. But if you'd like to join our conversation, we already have calls coming in, so let's hear from you as well. Do you especially live in Georgia or North Carolina? Tell us what has been discussed in your local community, and we'll hear from you right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, voter turnout this election season has been higher than normal, but data from Pew Research helps us put the higher than normal numbers in their proper perspective. Through the first 12 primaries of 2016, the combined Republican turnout has been the highest since at least 1980. Democratic turnout has been the highest since 1992, although there was a high turnout in 2008. Now for the reality check. The combined Republican turnout was only 17% of eligible voters. The combined Democratic turnout was 11%. Those percentages should discourage you. Even when they are contested primaries, there is no incumbent. We still can't get more than 4 out of 5 Americans to vote. During the election season, more Americans vote than in the primaries. In 2012, for example, 129 million Americans voted. That is a 53% of the voting age population compared to fewer than 28 million who voted in the primaries. In other words, there are about 100 million more Americans who voted in the general election that did not vote in the primaries. That means we should be careful not to extrapolate from the primaries to the general election. Supporters of Donald Trump argue that he is turning out lots of people to vote for him, and this will assure his victory in November. Actually, many of the people who may vote for him or Hillary Clinton are not even voting in the primaries. It's also worth mentioning that Donald Trump received about a third of the votes in the primaries, but that's 1/3 of 17%. In other words, he received less than 6% of the eligible Republican voters. Once again, that is why it's hard to extrapolate from the primaries to the general election. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, God's Not Dead 2. A question about Jesus could cost Grace Wesley everything. In theaters April 1st, rated PG. God'sNotDeadTheMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Talking about religious freedom and the issue of sexual orientation. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. And in particular, it is big corporations and big entities that are putting so much pressure on governors. And so when you think about the NBA and the NFL, Apple, Cisco, Marriott, to mention just a few, as well as Disney and Salesforce, you can begin to see that we could have a very significant loss of any kind of religious liberty just from the corporate pressure. So what about this? It's one thing to talk about gay bullies. It's another to talk about some of these corporate bullies now that are pressuring governors in Arizona and Indiana. Now, of course, you're talking about Georgia and North Carolina. I'd love to hear from some of you that live in those states or maybe in some of the other states where you are considering such. We'll take our first phone call. Let me just a piece that came out entirety, but again, it's an attempt to maybe help us think through this issue. And he talks about, 6 reasons why North Carolina got it right. First is the idea that all good laws discriminate against behaviors, not people. Laws, and that is, people are equal, but their behaviors are not. If you think about it, good laws treat all people equally, but they don't, by definition, do not treat all behaviors as equal. The very reason that laws exist in the first place is because not all behaviors are equal. Some are detrimental to individuals and society. So certainly that is an important principle. His third principle is that your identity is not your feelings, but your biology. And Frank Turek, I said, basically laments that he has to say the obvious. The reason we have separate bathrooms is because there are biological differences. And to ask the question that Ryan Anderson asked or that Frank Turek asked, does the NBA, the NFL, or Apple, or any one of these other companies allow men and women's bathrooms? Probably not. So why, he asked, do they think North Carolina is discriminating when they're doing exactly the same thing in their businesses? A fourth principle is the danger is real from sexual predators in women's restrooms. And if you don't think so, just watch one of these videos that are making the rounds right now. It warns about what can happen and, frankly, what has happened when dangerous men enter women's restrooms. Some of the people I've interacted with off air have told me stories of women that we've had on this program of nearly being raped in a bathroom by a man that goes in there. And so think about this for just a minute. A fifth principle is that race and homosexual behavior are not the same. I mean, right now, gay activates movement and in a sense, same-sex marriage ceremonies in churches and all sorts of other venues, and also, of course, allow men in women's bathrooms. And then finally, opposition to harmful behavior is not bigotry. It's very wise, and that's why I'd have to say that North Carolina, I think, got it right. But let's get your comments, because some of you, I can see, are living in Georgia and North Carolina on the screen here, so we're going to give you a chance to express your opinion here on Point of View. Let's head to Georgia first. WGNN. Rick, what say you?
Sir, welcome. Long-time listener, first-time caller. This is not about discrimination, Kerby. It's simply about two words, if I may change the word from discrimination to dollar bill. I'm sorry that folks don't have the courage and conviction to say so, and don't feel like a lot of people here in the state that I live in have said so. And, of course, you point out all of the hypocrisies here. I think you're aware that one of the most recent in another state, of course, the Pac-Man, the boxer, who made some comments about homosexuality in the right frame of which you and I would make, and went out to a little, I call it a little strip mall or some business there in California, and the owner there forbid him to even come on the property, forbid him to come. Now, did the news media cover that? I didn't hear any of the networks or even make any comment about that whatsoever. And that's what we're up against today, of course. So right here in the great state that I live in, and for the most part, very conservative, Nathan Dill, of course, doesn't have to run for re-election, so he doesn't have that consideration, waits until the session is over to even veto the bill. And so that's kind of where we're at, and we're living in that day and time. I'm also not just Rick, but I'm a Southern Baptist pastor, and I've pastored for many years in this area, and I'm seeing this more and more, and even seeing it in the church today. Not so much the attitude for this, but just the lack of speaking up and speaking out, and so we've kind of gotten to this place, in my own estimation, because we have not been as bold as we needed to be or should have been. And while you're commenting on the NBA and the NFL comments, the NBA, for years has led the world in unwed, out-of-wedlock fathers there.
There's another irony and hypocrisy there, isn't there?
Oh, my gosh. And then the NFL, they support guys like Johnny Manziel, and then they make the comment that we don't want Tim Tebow and his circus coming to town, and yet they uphold the girlfriend abusers and wife beaters and all of that kind of stuff. So it's obvious to me, it's obvious to you, should be obvious to some others, and apparently it is, but they're very few. Just wanted to know how much I appreciate your program. I've been listening to it for several years, and thank you so much for the positions you take, most of all for the wisdom you exhibit, and just keep up the good work.
Well, thank you so very much, and I think you got some items there for a sermon at least. So
yes,
thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you much again for letting me talk.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Thank you for calling. Don't be a stranger, and thank you for your ministry to your congregation as well. So we started out with Georgia, but I've also mentioned North Carolina, so let me jump to now North Carolina. And Robert, you have the platform now. What would you like to share with us?
Well, first of all, let me say good day, and I, too, appreciate your show. We listen to it on a regular basis on the job site. Doesn't make everybody happy, but so be it. In this state, we have an attorney general that a couple of years ago was very instrumental in getting rid of a constitutional amendment to our state that prohibited gay marriage. And now that McCory has done his thing, which I wholeheartedly applaud. I think it's absolutely the right thing he should have done. This same Roy Cooper has come out calling it a national embarrassment. Well, if you ask me, he is at the very least a statewide embarrassment because he's not upholding his office correctly.
Yeah.
And for all of my friends who live in North Carolina think like I do, we should have him impeached. And please, when the gubernatorial election comes up again, let's not vote him in. Let's keep McCoy because he's doing a good job. And, well, I don't know. I could go on, but...
Well, you're fortunate that you're in a state that has a Final Four team, but you're also fortunate in the state that you have, at least look like a lieutenant governor, a few other people, and legislators that understand the issue. We just need to get more of those in office, don't we?
Yes, sir, that we do. And then we could also vote with our money by boycotting Disney, Netflix, all those Apple, all those people that are supporting the wrong side of what's right. You know what I'm saying?
I do. And I've really wondered if it's coming to the point where we just have to say, Disney, we like your films, most of them, not all of them. We like your theme parks, but if this is the way you're going to throw your weight around and be a bully and prevent common sense legislation from being passed, then maybe it's time for us to just spend our entertainment dollars somewhere else.
I agree 100%. And if people got behind that idea, who think like we think, then it would make a profound impact, and they would turn around their stance.
Well, if I could get Tim Wildman and Jim Dobson and a few others to call for it, I'd do it. Pull the trigger on it, because I think that would it would be something. And that might, if nothing else, even if they don't see the light, maybe they'd feel the heat.
Yes, let's turn it up.
Yep.
Let's turn it up.
And my argument has always been that in many cases, we just want you to stay out of the culture wars. You know, when Lowe's got involved in that, and of course Disney has, and Apple and some of those, just stay out of the culture wars. You know, we want to buy your products, and, you know, I don't care if you take a stand one way or the other personally, but if you're going to bully individuals, that's a different issue. And you have the right to do that, but we also have a right to not support you when you do that. So let's take a break. If you would like to join a conversation, of course, we're talking in the moment about Georgia and North Carolina, but we'll put some other topics on the table. Next hour, we have the Attorney General, Ken Paxton from Texas. We'll be talking about abortion and immigration. But if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Columbia Pictures presents, in association with Affirm Films, Miracles from Heaven. When 10-year-old Anna Bean develops a rare incurable disease, her mother devotes herself to finding a solution.
Miracles are everywhere.
Then, after Anna has a freak accident, a miracle unfolds. How do we explain the impossible? Miracles from Heaven, starring Jennifer Garner, now playing. Rated PG, parental guidance suggested. More information is available at miraclesfromheaven-movie.com.
You don't have to look very hard to see that America needs a strong and thoughtful Christian witness. Thursday is the end of the first quarter of 2016, and support for Point of View is running about 5 weeks behind. Please stop what you're doing just for a moment. Make the most generous investment you can to touch lives across the nation. Visit pointofview.net. Make a few clicks to donate now, or call 1-800-347-5151. We need you to respond before the quarter ends Thursday. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Thank you.
Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View.
The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station.
And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I put two different issues together, but I think they're very related. What is happening in Georgia and what has been happening in North Carolina. One led to a veto by the governor in the state of Georgia, Nathan Deal. That is HB 757, and a lot of that due to pressure from NFL and Disney and Salesforce and some of the others. The other, of course, is the so-called bathroom bill, and this one is HB 12. And this is one that is being considered and also, of course, has felt tremendous pressure from things like the National Basketball Association and the National Football League and a number of others. And so, again, want to hear from some of you in Georgia and North Carolina, but I can see some of you that live in other states would like to weigh in as well. And so we're going to stay on that topic for a little bit longer. Let me mention we'll have the Attorney General with us later, and we'll talk about abortion and immigration. Then probably we'll finish off the program in that second hour, getting into some of the lessons we can learn from what is happening in Europe right now. And I want to apply some of those principles. But let's give a few more of you a chance to join the conversation. So we'll go to Georgia this time. Matthew, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Yeah, I've been listening for a little bit, and here I'm in college right now. Here recently, I'm going over what's called service learning, and that's where corporations encourage their people to volunteer and get out in the community, and by doing that, they're learning. And one of the topics that came up in this was the term of being a change agent in your community.
Yes.
And I heard this term originally watching a YouTube interview of Anton LaVey, who, as some people might know, is the father of Satanism in America.
Yeah, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he was the chief high priest of Satanism, so I'm very well aware of who he is, yes.
Oh, definitely. And one of the things that he said on there that they were going to accomplish their goals through the dissemination of information through music and television and through books and poetry and art and all kinds of things. And honestly, what I've seen in my generation happen, is the things that he was saying, where we've seen, those icons come out, and now we have a society that's kind of, embrace that do whatever you want to do attitude. And what gets me is that, we have all these things going on, and I do agree that, yes, it'd be good to boycott Disney, it'd be good to boycott these corporations that are wanting to do this, but how much more great would it be for the church to come out as an agent of change in our community?
Well said.
And I know that the church has already been that for the most part, but it would be great for the church to wake up and to become a change agent in their own community, and to put money into these arts, and to put, and I know that we're already doing that with movies like God's Not Dead and things like that, but, it'd be great to really, put that foot forward and to go into these popular culture things and promote that message of morality and what's good and what produces good. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
makes a lot of sense. And the church, again, just to give you some perspective, since you're a little bit younger, the church has usually been pretty good at the low-level grassroots kinds of things, whether it's helping the poor and soup kitchens, or whether it's missions, or whether it's having community activism. The problem has oftentimes been that very talented people like you, Matthew, sometimes if they say, well, I really want to be a missionary, they go into the mission field, which I'm not against because we need missionaries. But some of them don't see that if they went into the arts, they went into journalism and saw that as a mission field. We are only now starting to see something I've been talking about since I started doing this program 30 years ago, and that is the value of getting Christians in some of these film and movie studios making a difference. And now all of a sudden you have all sorts of films that we're talking about, Miracles from Heaven and God is Not Dead and God is Not Dead 2 and Messiah. I agree with every one of the films, but the point is they're producing a lot of faith-based films. Well, just imagine if we had, very strong Christians at Apple and at the NFL and in the NBA and at Salesforce and all sorts of corporate offices like Lowe's and others saying, well, wait a minute. Has anybody around here who's calling this discrimination even read this bill? As a matter of fact, the other day, this was really hilarious because the lieutenant governor in North Carolina, Dan Forrest, called up one of the companies and asked if anyone in the company had read the bill, and they admitted they had not. Well, those are the places where if we could get Christians in positions of influence to just ask questions like that, or, wait a minute, have you really thought about there is a difference between behavior and race? You're equating what the homosexual activists are saying here with, the civil rights movement. These are different things. That would be a change agent that I would really look forward to. So I agree with you. I think the ultimate answer is for people of your generation to see that missions could be in a corporation, it could be in the media, it could be as a university professor, as well as an individual that goes overseas and shares the gospel.
Yes, sir. And I work for a big corporation that delivers brown boxes. I won't say the name, but I've dealt with this discrimination from my own side of where they have freely allowed same-sex partners that are living together to receive health benefits in the company. But for my wife and I to receive health benefits, I've had to prove our marriage time and time again.
Isn't that amazing?
Just every year that I have to redo my health benefits, I have to go again and prove that me and my wife are married and things like that. And at the same time, we have been offering health benefits to same-sex couples. I felt like, wow, this is...
Appreciate your phone call. I just want to give a few more of individuals a chance to join the conversation, but great call. Hope you'll call again. Let's head now maybe to North Carolina again on the Good News Network. Nancy, you have the floor. What would you like to share with us?
Hi, Kerby. I've had the pleasure of talking to you before, and so it's good to be back to express an opinion again, and thank you for all the good works that you all do there. Yes, I am from North Carolina, and am very proud of our governor, Pat McCrory, for standing up and, taking that stand and doing what is right. I do have a problem with our LGBT community, comparing this to a race, issue. As a minority, as a black person, I don't think you can compare to what blacks went through in the 60s, with having to go to a different bathroom, and that bathroom certainly not being equal to whites and everything. But yet they want to make that comparison that they are being, put in this little isolated situation that if they go to a bathroom, that they want to go to what they choose to because of their behavior. And it just bothers me when I look at our TV news here. They have so much of what's going on with the LGBT community and their supporters, but they don't talk to anyone else, about this bill. You may find one person they talk to that is in support of it and why it's so important. But the rest of it is just, you're seeing these protest marches that are going on and everything like that. And it bothers you. And of course it hurts you as a Christian, what's going on in our nation. But also it hurts you as a minority because, as I said, that struggle, was certainly, nothing like what they are trying to compare it with. Their choice was a behavior. You can't help what God made you. He don't make mistakes, but you're choosing to make a mistake because of sin. And yet people are trying to make North Carolina look so bad, like we're such mean people, that we're making them go to bathrooms, like I said, that are, that don't look like regular bathrooms or something like that, which is totally false, and everything. And once again, I just feel like that it's these people that want to push their wrong ideals on you when you're trying to stand up for what is right. Having my young girls or even my young boys go to a bathroom where someone, if I wasn't in there, where you could what you could see what was going on. And even as a parent, Kerby, when I had to take my children to the movies, and my young sons would want to go to the bathroom, I always would knock on the door and say, "Okay, a lady is coming in." So
so the rest of us wouldn't overreact. Yes, I know.
Yes.
That's good. I've
and
got to come
everything.
to on one of those mandatory breaks. But Nancy, you are very articulate. I hope we get a chance to hear from you more in the future. But you've laid it out very well. So thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. Like I said, I love your show and pray for everyone there. And once again, I ask the listeners to please pray for Governor McCrory and the people of the legislature in North Carolina, that they will just keep standing and doing what is right and everything. So appreciate that so much.
Well, thank you. Need to take a break, but again, she just talks about something I've talked about before as well, and that is how many African Americans say they just do not believe that you can hitch the gay rights caboose to the civil rights train. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We've heard from some of you in Georgia and North Carolina, but I see people from other parts of the country who'd like to weigh in, Kansas, Texas, New Mexico. So let's take some of those phone calls. We'll head out to New Mexico first. Juan, thank you for calling today. What would you like to share with us?
Well, I just want to say, that it's a good idea to boycott those companies. I mean, there's millions and millions of Christians. Boycott now that the NBA game's coming, the championship. If they want to threaten Christians, we can also retaliate and say, well, we'll ban your games. Well, we won't buy your product, and it's going to make a big difference. Same thing for the NFL. The other thing is that Christians need to stand united. We need to stand united. Those people in those states where the governors have made a stand, they need to stand with them.
I would think so.
Stand with them and don't be afraid. Don't back down. You can, stand down. I went one time down here where I live with a sign that said, homosexuality and lesbianism is sin. And people passed and honked, and some walked up, and one got aggressive, and, I didn't back down. I held my ground, and I showed them, I ain't backing down. So, but, we got to stand there in love and try to reach them anyways. I told this one guy, look, we love you. I don't do this because I hate you. I do this because we got to preach the word of God. But we got to stand our ground. We can't be afraid. We can't be afraid, and we can't back down.
Well, I appreciate your boldness. And, I want to go on to get a few other comments because some others want to say somewhat the same thing. But I was just thinking about when we've had some of the individuals that have actually tried to defend people and Christians in England. And in particular, we talked about one individual holding a sign just like yours, and these British youth beat him up. And so when the London Bobbies came, they arrested the man holding the sign who hadn't done anything except hold a sign. So let's hope we don't get to that situation in our own country. Let's go to Texas, KAVX. I think, Robert, you wanted to say some of the same things as Juan, so I wanted to give you a platform to share your ideas as well.
Yes, thank you. Pretty much the same thing about the boycotting. But let's not forget that Disney is the parent company over Marvel, ABC, and even Star Wars. So got a big, high-profile movie coming out next month, Captain America Civil War. And one of the best ways we can protest is just stay home.
Well, again, if, as I said before, they won't see the light, they might feel the heat. And if, as Juan was saying just a minute ago, if we really to stand strong on some of these issues, I do believe that we might send a message. The problem has always been that a few people stand strong and the rest go, whatever, I'm not going to let that bother me. And so I want to see if that, because it certainly would help individuals. And of course, we talked about with Matthew, let's, even pray for the Christians that may be working in the NBA, the NFL, in some of these other places like Disney, and maybe they can stand up and bring some conversation and common sense into some of the discussion. But let's give a few more of you a chance just before we run out of time here. We'll go to Kansas now, KNEO. Steve, thanks for calling us today. What would you like to add?
Well, hi, Kerby. I've got a couple of comments and a couple of quick examples. But I wish, first to say, I guess, that I'm not against gay people and don't hate them by any means, but I'm certainly against their agenda. And I wish our Christian community, our average Christian, was as boned up on apologetics concerning the gospel and the truth of God's word and principles as the gay community is on their agenda. And an example of that is Books Without Borders sent me a book in the mail several weeks ago that I didn't ask for or anything, didn't pay for, but it was called A Skunk in My Bunk, which was a teaching tolerance for little children.
Mm-hmm.
And then locally in our community of about 20,000, this has been about a year ago, but the gay community gave some books to the library, and they had a big picture in the local paper about it.
Heather Has Two Mommies and Daddy's Roommate and all the ones. Yeah, we've seen them.
Yeah. Well, this one was worse. It was a rainbow-colored book, and it taught all about the gay thing, and it was absolutely obscene. But it just seems like not many of the Christians are willing to stand up against these things, because that book was for 12 years old and up. And I just don't see how our pastors and elders in the community wouldn't at least try to take a stance against those things.
And you said, why we can't get more people to stand up. We only need a small percentage. I mean, almost everything that has been achieved in the so-called gay agenda has come from a community that's about 2% or less of the population. Now, they've been able to convince other people who are not homosexual, lesbian, bisexual, whatever, to go along with that. But just to look at the incredible impact that the homosexual community has made when it's a fraction of the size of the evangelical community, for example. And so a lot of it has to do with how determined you are. A few individuals can make a great impact if they are really dedicated and stand strong. So that's another point to be made. So, Steve, thanks for talking about that. We need to do all we can to educate. And, of course, this issue of apologetics and helping people know how to defend their faith and defend biblical truth is something. It's one of the reasons why I quoted a little bit from Frank Turek. I've got a commentary coming out on that. You can, of course, read his, but you'll read mine as well. And I also have some things on Disney's double standard. I want to encourage you to do is go to our website. First of all, I do a daily commentary commentary. The commentary today, of course, is on voter turnout, and we haven't talked much about the election, but we'll get to that in the second hour. But also, we do all sorts of other things to give you some good talking points, and then we give you articles and encourage you sometimes to take those articles and then to post them on your Facebook page or your blog, or to send them some individuals. And so we really are trying to equip you in as many ways as possible. So as we come really to the end of our first quarter, that is tomorrow, I really want to have you consider what you might do to support this ministry. It's a deadline that really takes place every quarter, and we encourage you to consider what you might be able to do to support this ministry. And as I've pointed out, because it's an election year, because of some different giving issues and the rest, we're running about 5 weeks behind where we normally should be. And you can imagine if your budget was 5 weeks behind, it would be a little tougher to pay some of the bills, and it's tough to, pay salaries and things like that. So we recognize that this is a critical time in this nation. And notice we've, over this first hour, just talked about what has happened in Georgia and North Carolina. We haven't even gotten to the other issues. We haven't even mentioned names like Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, or Ted Cruz yet. So you recognize how many of these issues are front and center. And so this is really not a time to pull back. We really encourage you to make a special gift. And if you've been listening to the program, you know that we encourage you to visit the website and click that button that says Give Now. But I realize that from time to time I fail to mention that we also have a way in which you can write to us. And I tend to do that. I sometimes give online, but I tend to be one of those old-fashioned people that writes out a check. And so I make my check out to Point of View, and I drop it off here. But if not, I would mail it to Point of View, Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. So whether you send a check or whether you want to give online, please, I would encourage you between now and tomorrow to send a check. Make sure it's postmarked by tomorrow. That'd be really important. And so we're just really down to these last 2 days, and a gift of any size would be greatly appreciated. And if you appreciate the conversation we've had today about Georgia and North Carolina, that'd be a great opportunity for you to visit the website. You can watch some of the videos we've posted there. We have the Pray, Organize, and Vote material, my Viewpoints commentary, but also there is a green box and it says Give Now, and if you can give, we would greatly appreciate it. Let me just mention, in the second hour, I'm going to spend a little bit of time with the Attorney General of the state of Texas, Ken Paxton. Going to talk about this case before the Supreme Court on abortion, as well as what he and other attorney generals are doing about the issue of immigration. Then we'll come back and take some more of your phone calls. Those of you calling in, you can wait or call back again because we're not through. But we're out of time in this segment, so we'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
Look at the presidential campaign and you tell me, does America need more or less of a Christian witness right now? Thursday is the end of the first quarter of 2016, and being completely honest with you, support for Point of View is running about 5 weeks behind where it needs to be. Congress can run deficits virtually forever. We can't. And I plead with you to do something about that today, right now. Please, I'm asking you to stop what you're doing just for a moment, go online or pick up the phone, and make the most generous investment you can to touch lives across the nation, to teach listeners how to take our faith into the culture. Visit pointofview.net, make a few clicks, and donate now. Pointofview.net, or call 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. We need you to respond before the quarter ends Thursday. Thank you for being part of the Truth Team. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on, and if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about it while you're your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we are privileged to have with us the Attorney General of the state of Texas, the 51st Attorney General, Ken Paxton, an individual who's been on the program with us before, has a bachelor's and master's degree from Baylor University, also has a law degree from the University of Virginia School of Law, has really been a stalwart defender of everything from life to the religious liberty issues we were just talking about just a minute ago. So we're going to talk about this case that went before the Supreme Court on abortion, and also talk about some things that the Attorney General has done and is doing with other states to deal with this issue of immigration. And Ken Paxton, first of all, welcome to the program.
Hey, Kerby, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Now, before you joined us, we were talking with many of our listeners, not just in Georgia and North Carolina, although I got a lot of calls from those, as well as from others, because of the Georgia governor, Nathan Deal, who vetoed HB 757, which would have been kind of a religious freedom restoration act, and then also been talking about what's been happening in North Carolina with HB 2, which was an attempt to kind of change those bathroom bills. And don't know if you have opinions about those as well, but it's just a good example of why we have to be ever vigilant about this issue of religious liberty, especially when sexual orientation lately seems to trump any kind of religious freedom that we have.
Yeah, obviously I pay more attention to state law in Texas than I do Georgia and North Carolina, but they are dealing with some of the same issues we're dealing with here the year, and so that was one of our primary focuses last session and probably will be again to make sure that people are protected and their First Amendment rights are protected.
Well, again, I will open up a little bit later for some of the other ones that wanted to comment about what is happening there. We not only got calls from Georgia and North Carolina, but from all over the country, from Texas and Kansas and New Mexico. And I'm sure a lot of others will want to do so. But I wanted to put a few other issues on the table before we let you get back to your busy day. And the first one is this abortion bill. And it is one that is also an HB2, but of course it's HB2 coming out of the state of Texas. And the case was argued before the Supreme Court. First time the court has looked at abortion in 9 years, but this one is one that has been bumped up there simply because there has been an argument that those restrictions that you put on abortion clinics might be unconstitutional. So you had a chance to hear the oral arguments. You submitted a brief. We have that on our website here so people can read it if they would like to do so. But tell us how it went when it was up there.
Well, let me just say, first of all, this came out of the whole Kermit Gosnell catastrophe in Pennsylvania back in about 2011, and he ultimately was convicted on basically 3 deaths, 2 babies and a woman. And so legislatures across the country passed legislation, I think were 6 to 9, depending on which part of the statute, passed legislation trying to protect women from harm if they were going to have an abortion. Now, Texas not only did that, we also passed a 20-week ban on abortion. We also had a drug-induced abortion restriction. None of that was challenged. What they challenged were the 2 provisions related to women's health, which we were kind of surprised that that's what they went after. But the 2 are admitting privileges for doctors that are do abortions have to have admitting privileges to a hospital within 30 miles of where they do the abortion. And then second of all, the standards of those abortion clinics have to be up to those of other ambulatory surgical centers. That's what we were. That's what
mentioned that we do have the brief there. It's 72 pages long, but for people that want to get on their computer, you can go to the last page there, and you've got a picture of the state of Texas showing where some of these clinics are. And it seems to me that if you're a pro-choice or pro-abortion person, the only way you could argue this is, well, these women have to drive a lot further now because you've closed down some of these clinics. Now, that doesn't ring true with me in any other business. If we have health and safety regulations for restaurants and we close down a restaurant, and somebody has to drive a little bit further to go to their favorite fast food restaurant, we don't see that as unconstitutional. So this one would be a tough argument for Mr. Verrilli and others to argue. But how did that go?
Well, I mean, that is their argument, because there were many abortion clinics closed down, but, this happens all the time. This is, we put regulations that affects the market, and they adjust. And in this case, all we were doing is bringing abortion clinics up to the standard of other surgical centers. So it didn't seem unreasonable. And if you look at the actual accessibility, it really hasn't changed much. In every major metropolitan area where there was an abortion clinic, there still is one. Within, I think, 90% of all Texas women are within 150 miles of an abortion clinic, even as the law stands. And then there's exceptions for doctors who do under 50 abortions or 50 and under. They are not required to follow these standards. And so there's lots of exceptions, and there's also the actual accessibility. I don't think they made the argument that accessibility has changed.
Well, let's, if we can, maybe educate everybody on Supreme Court 101. We don't have an Antonin Scalia, so it is quite possible that the court could divide 4-4. Now, as I understand it, it would then say that the lower decision would stand. And we just saw that the other day with the case of compulsory union dues, which we have yet to have conversation about here on Point of View, but we will. And so if indeed it ended up being a 4-4 split, would that then mean that you're in the clear in terms of the law because of the way in which the Fifth Circuit Court and others have ruled? Yeah.
So obviously it was devastating to lose Justice Scalia and to be there on that day. The black robe draped over his where he sat. Obviously, you're going to affect a lot of cases. But in our case, if it is tied 4-4, then the Fifth Circuit, which ruled in our favor, their ruling would stand, and our provisions in Texas would stand. The downside is it would be a circuit court, and so it would only apply in the areas that circuit's in. So obviously it wouldn't be as good for the nation, but it would be good for that particular circuit.
Yes, and let me just mention, if any of you would like to join our conversation, we'll keep Ken Paxton on to answer those questions. We'll get a little bit later back into our questions about Georgia and North Carolina, but for those of you who have questions about this particular case, it is certainly the first time in 9 years that the Supreme Court has looked at this issue of abortion. It looks like it could split 4-4, but another possibility is that they could send it back to the circuit court. I was reading about that, and we've posted some of those articles. What would that mean?
Well, I think one of the arguments that we made when they were saying that they were arguing there was a lack of capacity. So if all these abortion clinics had shut down, that there wasn't enough capacity, but there's no evidence in the record that supports that argument, their argument, the other side's argument that there's not capacity. We don't think that is accurate, and so it's possible the court could send it back down and say, we need more evidence on capacity, and basically have the trial court look into is there enough capacity for people who want to have an abortion.
Anybody that's ever done a debate club, or of course you used to do moot court and things like that, you sometimes say, if I drew the pro-abortion stand here, I drew the short straw, because this would be a tough one to argue. And as you just pointed out, it is quite likely that you might end up with a 4-4 decision. And again, that wouldn't be universal, but it certainly would help everybody in the Fifth Circuit Court. And once again, establish that very common sense regulations could be applied to these abortion clinics.
Well, and that's absolutely true. And the court in a Virginia case the Supreme Court allowed these type of ambulatory surgical standards to apply and to be valid for the entire country. So we've had winning cases similar to this in the past. And that's why I was actually surprised they actually challenged that part of the law. I thought they would go after more like the 20-week ban.
Sure. Well, we'll take a break, continue our conversation about that, and then talk about how the Attorney General is working with other states to deal with this issue of immigration. So we'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Voter turnout this election season has been higher than normal, but data from Pew Research helps us put the higher than normal numbers in their proper perspective. Through the first 12 primaries of 2016, the combined Republican turnout has been the highest since at least 1980. Democratic turnout has been the highest since 1992, although there was a high turnout in 2008. Now for the reality check. The combined Republican turnout was only 17% of eligible voters. The combined Democratic turnout was 11%. Those percentages should discourage you. Even when they are contested primaries, there is no incumbent. We still can't get more than 4 out of 5 Americans to vote. During the election season, more Americans vote than in the primaries. In 2012, for example, 129 million Americans voted. That is a 53% of the voting age population compared to fewer than 28 million who voted in the primaries. In other words, there are about 100 million more Americans who voted in the general election that did not vote in the primaries. That means we should be careful not to extrapolate from the primaries to the general election. Supporters of Donald Trump argue that he is turning out lots of people to vote for him, and this will assure his victory in November. Actually, many of the people who may vote for him or Hillary Clinton are not even voting in the primaries. It's also worth mentioning that Donald Trump received about a third of the votes in the primaries, but that's 1/3 of 17%. In other words, he received less than 6% of the eligible Republican voters. Once again, that is why it's hard to extrapolate from the primaries to the general election. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, God's Not Dead 2. A question about Jesus could cost Grace Wesley everything. In theaters April 1st, rated PG. God'sNotDeadTheMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us a little bit longer the Attorney General of the state of Texas, Ken Paxton. And if you'd like to join us on some of the topics we put on the table, abortion, and now we'll talk about immigration, we'll do so. Then we'll get back to some of the conversation we've had about Georgia and North Carolina, also some lessons from Europe as we talk about what is happening there and also the reason we should pay attention to Muslim terrorism. So we'll get into all of that in just a minute. But Attorney General Paxton, let's, if we can, talk about the fact that you filed what's called a merits brief with the Supreme Court, and it includes 26 states that actually are arguing that what President Obama has as his immigration plan is an unlawful immigration plan that would grant lawfully present status to 4 million people who come to the United States illegally. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, immigration brief was filed recently, and basically the argument here is the president actually said over 20 times before he came out November 20th of 2014, he said over 20 times that he didn't have the authority to change immigration law, that Congress had to do it, that he was not a king, that he couldn't wave his magic wand, and yet he walked out November 20th of 2014 and he changed the law to take 4 million people who were here unlawfully and declare that they were here lawfully. That has significant consequences for both the federal government and the state government. In the federal government, it causes them to be eligible for work permits, tax credits, Social Security, Medicare, unemployment insurance, and the right to international travel. On the state side, it's going to cost more in education funds, driver's license fees, other things are going to change, and none of that occurred with a vote. He had no statutory authority to change it. He just went in and changed the law. So it is an immigration case, but it is fundamentally a separation of powers case, an argument about whether the president can usurp the constitutional authority of Congress and just change the law.
Now, again, there have been some movement in the courts. You have a judge in the Southern District of Texas that actually decided against the White House. So how does your particular filing affect some of these other cases that are being considered?
So it's really interesting. So we actually have not gone to trial on the merits of the case. We filed a preliminary injunction, which means we were asking the court to stop the administration from implementing this new lawful status for these 4 million people, and that we are, and that Texas would suffer irreparable harm if the administration went forward with their plan. So we were successful at the trial court, and then more recently we went and argued in the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit agreed with this, but they added. We had 3 claims in the trial court. The first was an APA that they didn't give proper notice and comment on the change. That's what we won on in the trial court. At the circuit court, we actually won on another ground, which was that there was no statutory authority for the president to change this. Going to the Supreme Court, which just granted cert, and we're going to argue April 18th. That they even added our constitutional claim, which was that the president didn't have the constitutional authority to change the law.
So again, one of the things I always love to do, Ken, as you well know from our radio program, is get people involved. And on the particular article we've posted here, this one just comes from the Examiner, but it's a good list of the various states that have joined with you in this case. As I look down there, a lot of the states where we broadcast are on that list, but I noticed that there are some states that are not where we have broadcast. So I would encourage all of our listeners to go to that particular article, and it's on our webpage, pointofview.net. Just go to the picture that you see there of Ken Paxton. It's the second one. The first one is the brief, that 72-page brief that was on the abortion one. Second one says unlawful immigrants. And it seems to me, Ken Paxton, that if some people, let's pick New Mexico, which is a neighboring state, which I didn't see on the list, and we just got a call from New Mexico, some of our listeners in New Mexico could write to their attorney general and say, I think you should join with us on this. Or maybe our listeners in California could also do that. It seems to me that this was something that would be a great illustration of why we need to have attorney generals and states paying attention to something that affects these states. Because if you look at those border states like California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, they pay a heavy price for a decision that was made by the president without even consulting Congress.
Well, if you think of it, it's pretty remarkable that we have 26 states already filing together to get in agreement. This is wrong, and it affects whether a state is in this lawsuit or not. They're affected both on the federal level, and that all these benefits now are going to be paid, but also locally, it's going to cost each state. It's going to cost Texas millions and millions of dollars, none of which was voted on by the legislature. It's just almost like a new tax, but no one ever voted on it. Congress didn't vote on it. Our state legislatures haven't voted on it. So it's all these new costs one day.
Well, and again, the problem with that also is we have not only just from a constitutional point of view, which is reason enough to be concerned about this, but even just from a practical point of view, it seems to me that something as complex as immigration law should be given full and careful consideration by Congress, by various testimony, by seeing the implications. I just did a commentary that will air next week on just the cost of mass deportations. It's real easy to say that in a presidential campaign, but what would the cost would be? And here again, what would be the cost of this unilateral decision by the president? So it's not just that it's unconstitutional, it's just impractical, because there are hidden costs, there are consequences that would only surface, hopefully, in a long and careful discussion and consideration of this kind of legislation.
Well, and as you know, just considering the federal part of this, we have a massive deficit, and if you add 4 million people to all of these programs, from tax credits to Social Security to Medicare, that's going to cost the Treasury more money, put us further in debt. And if Congress wants to do that, it's certainly up to them to do. But they need to at least have that debate and have input from the representatives that were elected to make those decisions, and not have one president make that change. And look, going down the road, if we have another president and they decide that they don't like guns, They don't want the Second Amendment to exist. What's stopping them from stepping out and just changing the law, just like President Obama just did?
Posted a couple of different articles that people can follow, and if you would like to know more about what Ken Paxton is doing, you can click on his picture there. It will take you to texasattorneygeneral.gov and give you some information there. And then we have both the case on abortion, and I thought it would be interesting for you to read the article which we have. Then we actually have the brief, which, as I said, 72 pages long, which helps explain that, and then the one on immigration. So lots of great resources there, which we have available. And again, if nothing else, Ken, we should encourage our listeners to be praying about this abortion decision, and certainly praying for you and the other attorneys generals that are involved in this particular case on immigration. So I appreciate you taking such a bold stand, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thanks for having me on. This is obviously a huge issue. It's not just about immigration. It is about the constitutional authority of the president, Congress, and how whether we're going to follow the Constitution going forward.
And the rule of law, for sure.
Yep.
So, Ken Paxton, Attorney General, and we'll have to do that again. Let's take a break, and when we come back, this last half hour, we're going to get into some of these very important issues, and some of those are Georgia and North Carolina. I know that some of you have been waiting, so we'll give you first chance to make your comments, and we certainly didn't run out of opportunity to give you that. So this last half hour will be now that have come out of Brussels. Very concerning. And also, Nabil Qureshi had a very good commentary column that appeared in USA Today. He will be on the program with us. Actually, interestingly enough, works with Ravi Zacharias, and he'll be in England, so he's actually going to call in from England when he does that in about a week or so. But wanted to educate you on those issues. But let's turn, first of all, this last half hour into an opportunity to hear from you. If you're in Georgia or North Carolina, you certainly are welcome to add your comments about HB 2 and HB 757 and about the governors and lieutenant governors in that state. But also, if you're from other parts of the country, we'd love to hear from you as well, because whether we talk about religious freedom or these bathroom bills, certainly would love to get your thoughts. And we're very concerned about the way in which these corporations are trying to bully various governors and have been successful in Indiana and Arizona and now Georgia. This continues pretty much whatever Apple wants to do, whatever Disney wants to do, whatever the NFL wants to do, they will actually determine public policy. Are you good with that? I'm not. So let's take a break, and we'll take some of your comments. And when we come back, let's also encourage you, maybe during the break, to click on that button that says Give if you appreciate some of the conversation you've had today with us and even some of the insight we got from the Attorney General of the state of Texas. I hope that you'll consider what you might do to support this ministry. And we're coming to this second to the last day of the end of the first quarter, so you can go to the website, pointofview.net. Of course, you can also write to us. Just put a check in the mail, make it out to Point of View, and send it to Point of View, Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas, 75221. Okay, let's open the phones. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take your calls right after this.
From PureFlix comes God's Not Dead 2. A classroom answer to an honest question about Jesus could cost Grace Wesley the teaching career she loves.
I would rather stand with God and be judged by the world than stand with the world and be judged by God.
God's Not Dead 2. In theaters April 1st. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at godsnotdead.com.
You don't have to look very hard to see that America needs a strong and thoughtful Christian witness. Thursday is the end of the first quarter of 2016, and support for Point of View is running about 5 weeks behind. Please stop what you're doing just for a moment. Make the most generous investment you can to touch lives across the nation. Visit pointofview.net. Make a few clicks to donate now, or call 1-800-347-5151. We need you to respond before the quarter ends Thursday. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Thank you.
Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. I see most of you want to talk about what has been happening in Georgia and North Carolina, and you don't have to be from Georgia or North Carolina. As I mentioned before, had a number of other people that wanted to address this issue, and did have a chance to talk with Ken Paxton, and I thought maybe that would have generated some questions about abortion and immigration, and maybe as we get closer to those decisions, that will be the case, but I wanted to let him go so he could get on to some activities he has and leave this last half hour for those of you that want to address the issue. And if you're just tuning in, because I notice people sometimes tune in and tune out, talking about, first of all, in the state of Georgia, the governor there in Georgia, Nathan Deal, actually vetoed HB 757, which is a religious freedom bill, which actually did very little to protect florists or photographers or others, but at least would have protected ministers from officiating same-sex ceremonies, would also have protected faith-based organizations from being forced to hire individuals whose views undermine their mission. Also talking about the amount of pressure being brought to North Carolina over HB 2. This was an attempt, a successful one, by the way, to overturn a bill that was called a bathroom bill. And as a result, then mandated that any public multiple occupancy restroom and changing room in the state be designated for those of the same biological sex, but also allowed for accommodation for transgender persons in single occupancy facilities. And we've been talking about the tremendous amount of pressure that's been brought to both of those states. In, of course, Georgia, the pressure from Disney, and I started the program today talking about what I felt was a real double standard on the part of Disney, as well as the NFL, and that one is significant because, as you may or may not know, there's a real attempt right now to bring the Super Bowl to Atlanta. And, of course, if you are very concerned about this right now, like the Atlanta Falcons owner Arthur Blank is, that's a lot of pressure. And then, of course, we have the pressure being brought to North Carolina as well by the National Basketball Association, as well as the NFL, but the NBA, because they are saying they might reconsider the 2017 All-Star Weekend activities in Charlotte. So what about all of this? If you would like to join our conversation, we'll give you that opportunity. And the person who's been waiting the longest is Shirley, listening on WLPE in Georgia. So, Shirley, thank you for waiting. And what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Thank you, Kerby, for taking my call. And I appreciate your program, what you stand for. And I would like to say that I'm in much opinion of the former caller, Juan, who said that we, as born-again believers, we need to stand up, speak out, and boycott these major multi-million-dollar businesses that have threatened Governor Deal if he didn't veto HB 757. They were going to boycott Georgia if he did not veto. So I say, as a born-again believer, we, in turn, need to boycott the businesses. We've just sat back, kept quiet far too long. We need to stand up, speak out. And to name a few, Coca-Cola, all their products, Netflix. I called customer service at Netflix yesterday and voiced and counseled our services with them, counseled their services with us. And the gentleman I spoke with, he didn't realize what was going on and didn't know anything about it.
Probably, yeah.
So he asked me, he says, now, why are you counseling? And I said, because Netflix, they threatened to boycott Georgia if Governor Deal did not veto HB 757. So he vetoed, and now I'm boycotting Netflix. And he was in much surprise to all this.
I'm sure he was, because nobody prepared him for that, because they just think that they could do anything they want. They don't even have to prepare people to the fact that there might be repercussions, because up until fairly recently, maybe not this time, Christians are going, well, okay, well, I don't like what they decided, but that's fine. I'll still buy Apple products. I'll still go to Disney movies. I'll still get Netflix, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's our problem today.
But maybe this is going to change. Like I said, if I, can get some agreement from a Tony Perkins or a Jim Dobson or a Tim Wildman or a John Stone Street, we'll join that in a minute and say, okay, let's target one. Can't do all of them because that gets complicated for people. But if Disney's the one or one of these others, I'm all in if we want to do that.
Right. Well, we selected the ones we want, and Apple's in there, Google, Chrome, Dow Chemical. I was surprised they're highly opposed to the bill. Delta Airlines, big business, they're a corporation. And like you say, the Walt Disney, the NFL. Actually, like you said, there's too many to name, but the listeners can go online to Safari and pull up the remaining businesses.
Well, and they're free to express their opinion, and we're free to decide whether or not we want to buy their products, go to their movies, or attend their games. So that's all good stuff. Let me keep moving because I know a lot of you would like to address this issue, so we'll stay in the state of Georgia on the Good News Network. Greg, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Yeah, my question is just for someone in Georgia, like a minister or something, if someone comes to them to be married of the same sex, what should they do?
I think the simple one right now for those of you that are in the ministry, and I think we can even put some of that on our website, and there's some great material in the book by Sean McDowell and John Stone Street on same-sex marriage. But I think the easy one is to simply say, we marry people in the church who agree with our doctrinal statement. And, of course, it would then suggest that you better have something in your doctrinal statement about marriages between one man and one woman. And I think that pretty much ends it because they couldn't say you're within the church. And that is at least a possible defense. Now, could some pastor be sued? Theoretically, yes. Realistically, no. And so I think what we talked about a while back with Kelly Shackelford, and we have some of that information on there, and he even has on at First Liberty's website some ways in which the church can protect itself. And it seems to me that we've never really had in our doctrinal statements in many of our churches something which we all sort of just assumed, and that is that marriage is between one man and one woman. So it seems to me that your doctrinal statement needs to address that. And then you can even have in the church do not marry people who do not agree with the doctrinal statement of the church, and that's it. And we do not make the facilities available to people that disagree with the doctrinal statement of the church. And I think that provides you with as much protection as we can provide at the moment, given the legal reality of the fact that the Supreme Court has ruled in its inscrutable wisdom that same-sex marriage is legal in all 50 states.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. I appreciate you answering my question and addressing that for me.
Well, appreciate you being in ministry, and thank you for asking it. And we'll probably spend a little more time on our Friday weekend edition since we have some lawyers that'll be in around the round table, and they can maybe answer a few more of those questions as well. Let's continue down the road and give as many of you a chance to join the conversation. Awita in North Carolina this time on the Good News Network. What would you add to our conversation?
Yes. Am I talking to you now?
You certainly are.
Yes, well, I had just come in from work and happened to hear you on the radio, and it happened to have been about something a sign I had just typed up and that I wanted to carry around to the churches and give out. And this is the way it reads.
Okay.
Call to all God's people, but this is what the Lord says. Hear, heed, and hearken. The time is now for my people to come out from behind the walls and closed doors. A time for my people to arise and stand up for my truth, for my word, and for me. Have not I said, for I am with thee? Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee, yea, I will help thee. I will uphold thee. I will be with thee to defend thee and help thee. This is what the Lord says. Now, for a time, ever since the Supreme Court passed that ruling on same-sex, I said the church sat back behind closed and said nothing.
Yep.
And said nothing. And then the rules were passed, and when they ruled on it, I said, now every law is going to have to be changed to satisfy this law. And I tried to tell the people in my church about it. You see, the Word of God says that faith without works is dead. There's only a select few that has come from behind the closed doors. I truly believe that if we, the church, would truly stand up, hold for what the Lord has said concerning these things, and stand on the courthouse steps and just pray from state to state, city to city, and town to town, being on one accord, and just pray, I believe our God will stand behind us.
Very good. We've got a break, and boy, Rita, I really appreciate that, and I'd love to see a copy of that if you wouldn't mind sending it. Let's take a break. We'll get some more phone calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And for a few more minutes, let's see if we can get a few more phone calls. We'll go back to the state of Georgia on the Good News Network. Ken, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Good afternoon, Kerby. Thank you for taking my call. A great discussion today about a governor standing tall in the saddle in the state of North Carolina. And as I was looking there on the Internet, National Review labeled Governor Deal's veto of House Bill 757. Under the election for governor, Governor Deal is nearly halfway through his second term. I called his office to express with utter dismay his vetoing of this bill that you have aptly described, and I hadn't really read the total deals. I had heard about it, and I had called to express my support for it and ask him to sign the bill, but that it was no great bill that infringed on anybody's rights. It just protected the right of religious exercise and not participating in something that violated your religious beliefs.
Sure. It's weaker than the one that they were talking about in Arizona and Indiana, and of course they forced those two governors to veto it, so you can see that the corporations are winning right now, and maybe we need to figure out a way to turn that around.
So I called and I thought, well, I wonder if this is providing cover. A lot of times Governor Deal has capitulated at the altar of Mammon, and I thought, well, what did Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle? Both of them are back in the 90s.
Worth pointing out. Yeah, that's right. It's worth pointing that out. Thank you.
And so Lieutenant Governor Cagle's office, I spoke to the secretary there, and she did read a portion of the press release from his office saying that he disagreed with the governor's veto. Now, I'd bet $1 to a donut, and I'm not a betting person, but that Lieutenant Governor Cagle possibly next year will be testing the waters to throw his head in the ring. If the Georgia legislature will stand tall in the saddle, Governor Deal should see this bill again next year on his desk.
Yes.
Okay? And then Lieutenant Governor Cagle, who, if he's elected as governor, should see that bill again. And we'll see if the words, the actions, will match up with the words. And so I would ask you, what can the citizens of North Carolina do about the Attorney General, who has said that the day that this bill that was signed by Governor McCrory in North Carolina was a national embarrassment, and that he would refuse to defend the bill? Can they impeach or recall him as an Attorney General?
They certainly can, and we might get into this. I mean, again, I recognize that I have listeners in 40-plus states, I think 42 states around the country, and we're talking about two different states, but I just want everybody to realize whether you're in Indiana or Arizona or California, whether you're in Illinois or whether you're in Texas, these things affect you ultimately as well. And there are days when we get a chance to talk with some other people that are kind of thinking on the Attorney General in North Carolina. Obviously, I think most of you in Georgia are putting some heat on your governor. But also, what about boycotts and things like that? I want to see if we can find some concrete ways that listeners, not only in Georgia and North Carolina, but around the country, can respond.
You're right. And I thought about this. Wasn't it Senator Lloyd Benson in a debate with Dan Quayle, a vice president, said, I knew Jack Kennedy, and you're no Jack Kennedy. I think Jesus would say to Governor Deal, Jesus, I knew Daniel, and you're no Daniel.
Well said. Deal. Well said. Hey, let's give high praise for both the lieutenant governors, though, in Georgia and North Carolina at the moment. I think both of them deserve something, but we'll see. We'll see how this all plays out. Words are cheap, and actions speak louder than words, and we will find out, won't we?
Right.
Well, Ken, thank you. A very articulate comment. And let me see real quickly, if you don't mind, I'm going to move on to just one or two more, just so I can give everybody a chance to join in the conversation. We'll stay in the state of Georgia again and go to Blake this time. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Hey, Mr. Kerby. Thank y'all for having me on. I have two things I want to mention today. First, I just wanted to express my disgust, I guess, with our governor and our Speaker of the House because of the way this bill has been. So the bill, from what I can tell, the reason for that is that it passed the Senate pretty okay. But then when it got to the House, Governor Deal and Speaker Ralston, our Speaker of the House, they both said no to it, and they
got
pretty
weak
much
knees, didn't they? They got real weak, didn't they? So that
yes, they're real weak.
Then when you end up with a weak bill, he still vetoes it. This thing is so weak it almost doesn't provide any protection other than for a pastor. But go ahead.
Either. And as a minister, I was really hoping for it to pass. And so I just really disgusted with that. And especially, and I think as a blow to our state, being a Georgian, having lived here all my life, it's really a disappointment, and makes me wonder what's ahead down the road for us. But also, I want to throw in that you was mentioning about what we can do to stand against this. April the 22nd, we're having a We Stand With God rally in Atlanta across the road from the Capitol at Liberty Plaza. And that's going to be from 11 to 1 p.m., if I remember right.
Well, let's get some information on that, and we'll promote it as we always do here on Point of View. So see if we can get people from all over the state. Let me real quickly see if I can go to North Carolina. We're really tight on time, but Norman, I wanted to hear from you. WLGP in North Carolina. What would you like to add?
State of North Carolina, the legislature for upholding common sense and making this bill work for the greater society good. You know, everybody's arguing about that this is discriminatory, but truth of the matter, according to my calculations, yes, maybe we're discriminated 1 out of 50 on the transgender side, but isn't 49 out of 50 that holds the Christian values and societal norms for, you know, sexual purity? Aren't we better off for it? And I just want to highlight the fact that we don't hear the word the greater good and for society's benefit anymore. We're living in a time where everybody wants their own right. They want what best benefits me, and if what best benefits me works to worse than everybody else's situation, then it's not for societal good.
Very, very well said. Wish I had a little more time, but we're just about out of time. And so let me just mention that we will certainly give you an opportunity to join in on this conversation throughout the rest of the week. J.C. Watts is going to be with us tomorrow. We're going to talk about his book, but I'm sure he's got some comments as well. And African-American who was involved in the civil rights movement having the homosexual gay rights caboose actually hooked up to the civil rights train. So we're going to talk about that with him tomorrow, and we also have a couple of other guests. But just before we run out of time, we're coming to the second to last day in which I really would encourage you, if you've appreciated this conversation today. You've heard from the Attorney General from the state of Texas about abortion and immigration. We've heard from callers all over the country about this issue of what is happening in Georgia and North Carolina. Also, we'll certainly get into some of these other topics that we were going to address today, like some of the lessons we are learning from Europe and Muslim terrorism. And if you appreciate that, I hope that you might just take the time to visit our website, pointofview.net. Find some of the articles I've posted on these issues today, as well as my commentary. And if you would like to write to us, of course, just make a check out to Point of View. Send it to Point of View, Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Make it as generous as you can, because we're running about 5 weeks behind where we need to be in terms of our budget. And so we're doing the best we can to deal with that shortfall. But if you can help us, that would be helpful as well. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. Looking forward to J.C. Watts and others tomorrow on Point of View. So we'll see you then.
Look at the presidential campaign and you tell me, does America need more or less of a Christian witness right now? Thursday is the end of the first quarter of 2016, and being completely honest with you, support for Point of View is running about 5 weeks behind where it needs to be. Congress can run deficits virtually forever. We can't. And I plead with you to do something about that today, right now. Please, I'm asking you to stop what you're doing just for a moment, go online or pick up the phone, and make the most generous listeners how to take our faith into the culture. Visit pointofview.net, make a few clicks, and donate now. Pointofview.net, or call 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. We need you to respond before the quarter ends Thursday. Thank you for being part of the Truth Team. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all.